Christmas Eve 2015. A beloved mall Santa Claus vanished without a trace, leaving hundreds of children's letters unopened and a community shattered. For 2 years, Detective Maria Brody chased dead ends until a routine welfare check led her down a basement staircase. What she found defied everything she thought she knew about this case. The Santa suit was there. The gifts were arranged, and in the darkness he was smiling. But the reason why will leave you speechless. Before I start, a quick like and subscribe is always appreciated. And please let me know in the comments what Christmas magic means to you. Gerald Thompson had been playing Santa Claus at Pinewood Mall in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, for 17 consecutive years. Everyone knew him. The kids loved him. Parents trusted him completely. He wasn't just some seasonal worker collecting a paycheck. Gerald was the real deal. A 63-year-old retired postal worker with a genuine white beard and a laugh that could fill an entire room. He never missed a day during the Christmas season, never called in sick, never showed up late. His dedication was legendary among the mall staff and families who returned year after year just to see him. But on Christmas Eve, 2015, something changed. Gerald arrived at the mall that morning at 8:30, just like always. He waved to the security guard, Marcus Webb, who had worked the morning shift for 5 years. Marcus would later tell police that Gerald seemed perfectly normal that day. Gerald went straight to the employee break room, changed into his Santa suit, and headed to his station near the north entrance of the mall. The line of children waiting to see him stretched all the way past the food court. Parents held shopping bags, checking their watches, hoping to squeeze in one last visit with Santa before the big day arrived. Gerald sat in his oversized velvet chair, positioned his hands on the armrests, and began what would become his final shift. For hours, he listened to wishes, dolls and bicycles, video games and puppies. He handed out candy canes wrapped in cellophane, posed for countless photos, and promised every single child that he would do his very best. Around 2:15 that afternoon, Gerald stood up from his chair during a scheduled break. He told his helper elf, a college student named Amanda Pierce, that he needed to use the restroom. Amanda watched him walk toward the hallway that led to the employee restrooms near the back of the mall. She expected him to return in 5 or 10 minutes, maybe 15 at most. But 15 minutes passed, then 20, then 30. Amanda started to worry. She walked down the hallway, knocked on the men's restroom door, and called out his name. No response. She pushed the door open slightly and shouted again. Nothing. The restroom was empty. She checked the break room. Empty. She asked other employees if they had seen Gerald. No one had. She radioed mall security, and Marcus Webb started searching. They checked every bathroom, every storage room, every exit. They reviewed security camera footage from the hallways. And that's when things became truly strange. The cameras showed Gerald entering the hallway at 2:16 in the afternoon, but they never showed him leaving. It was as if he had simply vanished into thin air. Mall management immediately called the police. Officers arrived within 20 minutes and began a thorough search of the entire building. They questioned employees, checked supply closets, examined the loading docks, and even climbed up to inspect the roof access points. Gerald Thompson was nowhere to be found. His car was still parked in the employee lot. His street clothes were still hanging in his locker. His wallet, containing his driver's license and $43 in cash, was inside his jacket pocket. His cell phone was there too, fully charged. Everything he owned was accounted for except the man himself. Detective Maria Brody was assigned to the case on December 26th. She was a 15-year veteran of the Cedar Rapids Police Department, known for her methodical approach and refusal to accept easy answers. Maria started by interviewing everyone who had been at the mall that day. She spoke with Amanda Pierce first. Amanda told Maria that Gerald had seemed completely normal that morning, happy even. He joked with her about how many candy canes they would give out. He talked about his plans for Christmas dinner with his daughter. Nothing seemed off. Maria then interviewed Marcus Webb, the security guard. Marcus described Gerald as one of the most reliable people he had ever known. He showed Maria the security footage himself, pointing to the screen as Gerald walked down the hallway. Marcus rewound the tape and played it again. Gerald walked into frame at 2:16 and 14 seconds. He turned the corner toward the restrooms, and then he was gone. The camera positioned at the other end of the hallway showed absolutely nothing. No one walked past it during that entire time window. Maria studied the footage for hours. She watched it frame by frame, looking for any sign of tampering or editing. The footage appeared genuine. There were no obvious cuts or glitches. Maria requested the original files from the security company, and forensic analysts confirmed the video had not been altered. So where did Gerald go? Maria examined the hallway herself. It was a standard corridor with white walls, fluorescent lighting, and gray commercial carpet. The men's restroom was on the left side. A women's restroom was on the right. Further down was an emergency exit door that led to the back parking lot. That door was alarmed and had not been opened that day according to the system logs. There were no windows, no hidden passages, no access panels large enough for a person to crawl through. Maria measured everything. She photographed every inch. She brought in a K9 unit to search for any trace of Gerald's scent. The dogs tracked his path down the hallway, into the restroom, and then seemed to lose the trail entirely. It made no sense. Maria interviewed Gerald's family next. His daughter, Caroline Thompson, was devastated. She told Maria that her father had been excited about Christmas this year. They had plans to cook together, watch old movies, and exchange gifts. Caroline said her father had no history of mental illness, no strange behavior, no signs of dementia or confusion. He was sharp as ever. She showed Maria photographs of Gerald from recent months. He looked healthy and vibrant. Maria asked about Gerald's relationships. Did he have any enemies? Any financial troubles? Any secrets? Caroline shook her head. Her father was an open book. He lived a simple life. He owned a small house on Maple Street, paid his bills on time, volunteered at the local food bank, and attended church every Sunday. He had friends, but no romantic relationships, since his wife died 8 years earlier. Everything about Gerald Thompson suggested a man with no reason to disappear. Maria obtained a warrant to search Gerald's house. She and 2 other officers spent an entire day going through his belongings. They found nothing unusual. His home was neat and organized. There were photos of his daughter and grandchildren on the walls. His refrigerator held leftovers and a grocery list written in careful handwriting. His bedroom closet contained his everyday clothes, all clean and pressed. In the living room, Maria found a small desk with a calendar. Gerald had marked December 25th with a star and written dinner with Caroline in blue ink. On his nightstand was a book about World War II history, a bookmark placed about halfway through. Everything indicated a man who fully intended to return home. Maria checked his phone records. Gerald had made 3 calls on December 24th. One to his daughter to confirm dinner plans, one to the mall to verify his schedule, one to a friend named Robert Hayes to wish him Merry Christmas. Maria contacted Robert Hayes. He was a 70-year-old retired teacher who had known Gerald for over 30 years. Robert told Maria that their phone conversation that morning had been completely ordinary. They talked about football, the weather, and holiday plans. Gerald mentioned he was looking forward to seeing all the kids at the mall one last time before Christmas. Robert said Gerald sounded happy, maybe even more cheerful than usual. He never mentioned any problems or concerns. Maria asked if Gerald had ever talked about wanting to leave town or start over somewhere new. Robert laughed at the suggestion. He said Gerald loved Cedar Rapids and would never abandon his daughter and grandchildren. Maria thanked Robert for his time and returned to the station. She spread out all her notes on a conference table and stared at them for hours. Every piece of evidence pointed to a man who had no reason to vanish and no means to do so. The local news picked up the story on December 27th. Gerald's face appeared on television screens across Iowa. The headline read, "Beloved Mall Santa Vanishes Without a Trace." Reporters interviewed shoppers who had seen Gerald that day. Everyone said the same thing. He seemed normal, happy, engaged. No one noticed anything strange. The story spread quickly. National news outlets picked it up. Social media posts about the missing Santa went viral. Tips started pouring into the police station. People claimed they saw Gerald at gas stations, restaurants, and hotels across the Midwest. Maria and her team followed up on every single lead. They drove to neighboring towns, showed his photo to witnesses, and reviewed security footage from dozens of businesses. Every lead turned into a dead end. The sightings were all cases of mistaken identity. Gerald Thompson had truly disappeared without leaving a single trace. As weeks turned into months, the case grew cold. Maria refused to give up. She kept Gerald's file on her desk, reviewing it whenever she had spare time. She re-interviewed witnesses, hoping someone might remember a detail they had forgotten. She consulted with experts in missing persons cases. She even contacted retired detectives who had worked similar disappearances. No one could offer an explanation that fit the facts. How does a man vanish from a hallway with only one entrance and one exit? How does he leave behind everything he owns, including his car and wallet? How does he disappear in the middle of a crowded mall on Christmas Eve without a single person noticing? The questions haunted Maria. She dreamed about that hallway. She saw Gerald's face when she closed her eyes. She felt like she was missing something obvious, some crucial detail that would crack the case wide open. But no matter how hard she looked, she couldn't find it. By the summer of 2016, the media attention had faded. People moved on to other stories. Caroline Thompson continued to search for her father. She created a website dedicated to finding him. She posted photos and information about his disappearance. She organized search parties that combed through parks, forests, and abandoned buildings in the area. She contacted psychics and private investigators, desperate for any lead. Nothing worked. Gerald remained missing. Maria stayed in touch with Caroline, calling her every few weeks to check in and provide updates. Even when there were none, Maria felt a personal responsibility to find Gerald. This case had gotten under her skin in a way few others had. Maybe it was because he seemed like such a good man. Maybe it was because his disappearance made no logical sense. Or maybe it was because she had 2 young daughters herself, and she couldn't imagine the pain Caroline must be feeling. Maria thought about Gerald often. She wondered if he was alive somewhere, living under a new identity. She wondered if he had suffered a medical emergency no one witnessed. She wondered if someone had taken him against his will. But none of these theories fit the evidence. There was no indication of foul play, no signs of struggle, no blood or torn fabric, no ransom demands, no bodies discovered in the months that followed. Gerald Thompson had simply ceased to exist in that hallway, and no one could explain why. By December of 2016, a full year had passed since Gerald's disappearance. Caroline held a small memorial service at her church. Friends and family gathered to remember him. They shared stories about his kindness, his humor, and his dedication to making children smile. Some people brought photos of their kids sitting on Santa's lap, pointing at Gerald's face with tears in their eyes. Maria attended the service. She sat in the back row, listening to the testimonies. She felt the weight of failure pressing down on her shoulders. She had promised Caroline she would find answers, but she had none to give. After the service, Caroline approached Maria and hugged her. She told Maria that she appreciated everything she had done. She said she understood that some mysteries might never be solved, but she asked Maria to promise that she would never completely give up. Maria promised. She meant it. As 2017 began, Maria continued working other cases, but Gerald's file remained on her desk. She glanced at it every morning when she arrived at the station. She had memorized every detail: the hallway, the timeline, the witness statements, the security footage. She had watched that video hundreds of times. Sometimes she wondered if she was losing her mind, seeing things that weren't there or missing things that were obvious. In March of 2017, Maria received a call that would change everything. The call came from a social worker named Patricia Reynolds, who worked for the county's Adult Protective Services Department. Patricia explained that she had been assigned to conduct a welfare check on an elderly woman. The woman's name was Evelyn Mitchell, and she was 87 years old. Her neighbors had reported concerns about her health and living conditions. Patricia had visited Evelyn's home that morning, and what she found had prompted her to call the police immediately. Maria asked what she had discovered. Patricia hesitated, then said she needed Maria to come see for herself. She gave Maria the address 512 Oakwood Avenue, about 15 minutes from the station. Maria grabbed her jacket and keys. She had no idea this routine welfare check would lead her straight to Gerald Thompson. The drive to Oakwood Avenue took Maria through a quiet residential neighborhood. Most of the houses were small, built in the 1940s and 50s. Some were well maintained with fresh paint and tidy lawns. Others showed signs of neglect, with peeling siding and overgrown yards. Evelyn Mitchell's house fell into the second category. The grass hadn't been mowed in months. Newspapers, yellowed with age, littered the front porch. Maria parked behind Patricia's car and walked up the cracked concrete path to the front door. Patricia was waiting for her, standing on the porch with a concerned expression. She was a woman in her 50s with gray hair, pulled back in a bun. She wore a professional blazer despite the warm spring weather. Patricia shook Maria's hand and spoke in a low voice. She explained that Evelyn Mitchell had lived alone in this house for over 40 years. Her husband died in 1993. She had no children, no close relatives. Her only contact with the outside world came from a neighbor who occasionally brought her groceries. Patricia said she had knocked on the front door multiple times before Evelyn finally answered. The woman was frail, confused, and malnourished. Patricia had called an ambulance, and paramedics were currently inside assessing Evelyn's condition. But that wasn't why Patricia had called Maria. Patricia said there was someone else in the house, someone in the basement, someone who had been there for a very long time. Maria felt her pulse quicken. She asked Patricia to explain. Patricia took a breath and said that when she entered the house to wait with Evelyn for the ambulance, she noticed a smell. Not the typical odor of an elderly person's home. Something different. Something that reminded her of old wood and dust, and something else she couldn't quite identify. Evelyn kept glancing toward a door near the kitchen. Patricia asked what was behind the door, and Evelyn said it was just the basement. But the way she said it made Patricia suspicious. After the paramedics arrived and began treating Evelyn, Patricia opened the basement door. She found a set of wooden stairs leading down into darkness. She called out, asking if anyone was down there, and from the shadows below, someone answered. A man's voice, calm and clear. He said his name was Gerald. Patricia asked Gerald to come upstairs, but he refused. He said he couldn't leave. Not yet. Patricia immediately called the police. Maria's mind raced. Could this be Gerald Thompson? After all this time, could he really be alive and living in some stranger's basement? Maria asked Patricia if she had seen the man. Patricia shook her head. She said she was too frightened to go down the stairs alone. She waited outside for the police to arrive. Maria stepped into the house. The interior matched the exterior, cluttered and neglected. The living room was filled with old furniture, covered in layers of dust. Stacks of magazines and newspapers created narrow pathways between rooms. The air was stale and heavy. Maria could hear the paramedics talking to Evelyn in the bedroom down the hall. She turned her attention to the basement door. It was slightly ajar. Maria pulled out her flashlight and pushed the door open wider. The hinges creaked. The stairs descended into complete darkness. She could see the first few steps, but beyond that, nothing but black. Maria called down. She identified herself as a police detective and asked if anyone was there. There was a pause, then a voice responded from below. A man's voice, measured and calm. He said yes, someone was there. Maria asked him to come upstairs. The voice said he couldn't do that. Maria asked why not. The voice said he was waiting for something. Maria asked what he was waiting for. The voice said he would explain everything if she came down. Maria felt a chill run through her body. Every instinct told her this was wrong, that she should call for backup and wait. But something else pushed her forward, a need to know, to finally understand what had happened to Gerald Thompson. She placed her foot on the first step. The wood groaned under her weight. She descended slowly, shining her flashlight ahead of her. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing stone walls and a dirt floor. The basement smelled like earth and mildew, and something faintly sweet, like old candy. As Maria reached the bottom of the stairs, her flashlight swept across the space. What she saw stopped her in her tracks. The basement had been transformed into something that looked like a workshop. Wooden tables lined the walls, covered with tools, paint, and what appeared to be toy parts. Bicycles in various states of assembly leaned against the stone foundation. Dolls with missing arms sat next to jars of buttons. Stuffed animals with torn seams waited to be repaired. And in the center of it all, sitting in a chair that looked remarkably like the one from the mall, was a man in a Santa suit. His white beard was longer now, reaching down to his chest. His red suit was dusty but intact, and he was smiling. Not a sinister smile, not a confused or deranged expression, but a genuine warm smile, the kind that made children feel safe. Maria's flashlight beam settled on his face. She recognized him immediately from the hundreds of times she had studied his photograph. Gerald Thompson, alive, sitting in a basement, surrounded by toys, still wearing his Santa suit. Maria didn't move. For several seconds, she couldn't speak. Gerald broke the silence. He said hello, and he was sorry if he had caused her any trouble. His voice was gentle, apologetic even. Maria finally found her words. She asked if he was Gerald Thompson. He nodded. She asked if he knew people had been searching for him. He said yes, he knew. She asked why he had disappeared. Gerald gestured to the space around him. He said he had to finish the work. Maria stepped closer, her hand instinctively resting near her holster, though she didn't feel threatened. She asked what work he meant. Gerald explained that on Christmas Eve, 2015, when he took his break and walked down that hallway, he heard something, a voice. Not a human voice, something else. Something that called to him, told him he was needed. Maria asked what kind of voice. Gerald said it was hard to explain. He described it as a feeling more than words. A pull, an urgency, like when you suddenly remember something important you forgot to do. He said the voice led him through the mall, down corridors he had never noticed before, and out a door he didn't know existed. He found himself standing outside, in the cold, with no memory of how he got there. He walked for hours, following the pull until he arrived at this house. The front door was unlocked. He went inside. He found Evelyn sleeping in her chair, and he found the basement full of broken toys. Gerald said he understood then what he was supposed to do. These were toys that children had thrown away or lost or broken. They were forgotten, abandoned, and Santa Claus couldn't let that happen. He had to fix them. He had to make them whole again. So he stayed. He worked every single day, repairing, restoring, making sure each toy was ready to find a new child who needed it. Maria listened to Gerald's explanation with a mixture of disbelief and concern. She asked if Evelyn knew he was down here. Gerald nodded. He said Evelyn had found him the first night. She came down the stairs with a flashlight, just like Maria had. She saw him working, and instead of being frightened, she smiled. She told him her husband used to repair toys in this same basement years ago. She said it made her happy to hear someone working down here again. She brought him food and water every day. She never asked him to leave. She understood, in a way, that Gerald couldn't quite explain, that his work was important. Maria processed this information slowly. She asked if Gerald had been held here against his will. Gerald shook his head firmly. He said he could leave any time he wanted. He chose to stay. Maria asked why he didn't contact his daughter, didn't let anyone know he was safe. Gerald's expression shifted. For the first time, his smile faded. He said he thought about calling Caroline every single day, but every time he reached for a phone, the pull would return. The voice would remind him that the work wasn't finished, that there were still toys to fix, still children waiting. He said he knew it didn't make sense. He knew people would think he was crazy. But down here, in this basement, surrounded by these forgotten things, he felt more purpose than he had in years. Maria asked to see what he had been working on. Gerald stood slowly, his joints stiff from sitting. He was thinner than in his photographs, his movements more deliberate. But his eyes were clear and alert. He led Maria around the basement, showing her his projects. He had organized everything by category: dolls on one table, action figures on another, stuffed animals in bins, wooden toys stacked carefully by the wall. Gerald picked up a small teddy bear with a torn ear. He showed Maria how he had stitched it back together, using thread that matched the original color perfectly. He held up a bicycle with a bent wheel that he had straightened and realigned. He pointed to a collection of board games with missing pieces that he had crafted replacements for using cardboard and paint. Every item had been touched with care. Every repair showed skill and patience. Maria asked where all these toys came from. Gerald said Evelyn had been collecting them for years. Her husband used to find broken toys at garage sales and thrift stores. After he died, Evelyn continued the tradition, bringing home items that other people discarded. She stored them in the basement, intending to fix them someday, but she grew too old, too frail. The toys piled up. Until Gerald arrived, Maria asked how many toys he had repaired. Gerald looked around the space and said he wasn't sure. Hundreds. Maybe more. He had lost track. Maria noticed something else. In the corner of the basement, there was a small cot with a pillow and blanket. A lamp sat on an overturned crate next to it. A few books were stacked underneath. This was where Gerald slept. This had been his home for over 2 years. Maria asked if he ever went outside. Gerald said yes, sometimes. Late at night, when everyone was asleep, he would walk around the neighborhood, looking at the stars, breathing fresh air. Then he would come back to work. Maria felt a profound sadness wash over her. This man, who had brought joy to thousands of children, who had a daughter who loved him, had chosen to isolate himself in a basement to fix broken toys. She asked Gerald if he understood that this wasn't normal behavior. Gerald smiled again, that same gentle expression. He said he knew it seemed strange, but he asked Maria to consider something. How many people go through life without ever finding real purpose? How many people work jobs they hate, surround themselves with things that don't matter, and never feel truly needed? Gerald said that down here, every single day, he made something better. He took something broken and made it whole. He gave forgotten things a second chance. And when these toys eventually found their way to children who needed them, those children would feel loved. They would feel like someone cared. Isn't that what Santa Claus was supposed to do? Maria didn't have an answer. She asked Gerald if he would be willing to come upstairs, to talk more somewhere more comfortable. Gerald hesitated. He looked around at the tables covered with unfinished projects. He said there was still so much work to do. Maria asked him to think about his daughter, about Caroline, about how much she had suffered, not knowing if he was alive or dead. Gerald's eyes filled with tears. He said he thought about her constantly. He said the guilt was overwhelming sometimes, but the pull was stronger. The need to finish the work kept him here. Maria asked if she could call Caroline, let her know he was safe. Gerald nodded slowly. He said yes, she could do that. But he asked Maria to explain that he wasn't crazy, that he was doing something important, that he would come home when the work was done. Maria agreed. She radioed for additional officers to come to the location. While they waited, she sat on an old stool near Gerald's workbench. She asked him questions about his time in the basement. He told her about his routine. He woke at dawn. Evelyn would bring him breakfast, usually toast and coffee. They would talk for a few minutes. She would tell him about her husband, about the years they spent together. Then Gerald would work until lunch. More work in the afternoon. Dinner at 6. More work until midnight. He slept 4 or 5 hours a night. He didn't need much. The work energized him, he said, made him feel alive. Maria asked about the day he disappeared from the mall. Gerald closed his eyes, trying to remember. He said it felt like a dream now. He remembered walking down the hallway. He remembered feeling dizzy, like the world was tilting. Then he heard the voice. It wasn't threatening. It wasn't scary. It was inviting. It said, "Come, there's work to be done." And he followed. He didn't question it. He didn't resist. He just walked. When he came to his senses, he was standing outside this house. He couldn't remember the route he took, or how long it took him to get here. It was as if he had been transported. Maria asked if he had experienced anything like that before. Gerald said no, never. He had no history of seizures or blackouts, no mental health issues, no drug or alcohol use. He was as confused by the experience as anyone. But once he saw the basement and the toys, everything made sense. He understood why he was brought here. 2 uniformed officers arrived and came down to the basement. They stood at the bottom of the stairs, staring at the scene with wide eyes. One of them recognized Gerald immediately and whispered his name. Maria instructed them to secure the area and make sure Gerald had everything he needed. She went upstairs to find Patricia. The paramedics were loading Evelyn onto a stretcher. The elderly woman looked tiny and fragile, her skin pale against the white sheets. Maria approached and identified herself. She asked Evelyn if she felt strong enough to answer a few questions. Evelyn nodded weakly. Maria asked how long Gerald had been living in her basement. Evelyn said it had been a long time. 2 winters, maybe. She wasn't sure. Time moved differently when you were old. Maria asked why she never called anyone. Evelyn said she didn't think she needed to. Gerald seemed happy. He was doing good work. Her husband would have liked him. Maria asked if Gerald had ever tried to leave. Evelyn shook her head. She said he never wanted to. He told her once that this was where he belonged. Maria thanked Evelyn for her cooperation. The paramedics carried the stretcher outside to the waiting ambulance. Maria watched it drive away. Lights flashing, but no siren. She pulled out her phone and dialed Caroline Thompson's number. Her hands shook slightly as she waited for the call to connect. Caroline answered on the second ring. Maria took a breath and said the words Caroline had been waiting 2 years to hear. "We found your father. He's alive." There was a long silence on the other end. Then Caroline started crying. Maria explained the situation as gently as she could. She told Caroline that Gerald was physically healthy, but emotionally complicated. She said he had been staying in someone's basement, fixing toys. She warned Caroline that it would be difficult to understand. Caroline said she didn't care about any of that. She just wanted to see him. Maria gave her the address. Caroline said she would be there in 15 minutes. Maria went back down to the basement. Gerald was sitting in his chair again, his hands folded in his lap. She told him his daughter was coming. Gerald closed his eyes. He said he wasn't ready. Maria said he didn't have a choice. It was time. When Caroline arrived, Maria met her at the door. Caroline's eyes were red from crying. She hugged Maria tightly, thanking her over and over. Maria led her to the basement door and warned her that what she was about to see might be shocking. Caroline said she understood. They descended the stairs together. When Caroline saw her father, sitting there in his Santa suit, surrounded by broken toys, she stopped breathing. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Caroline ran to him. She threw her arms around his neck and sobbed into his shoulder. Gerald held her, tears streaming down his face into his white beard. He whispered that he was sorry, so sorry. Caroline pulled back and looked at him. She asked why. Why did he leave? Why didn't he call? Why did he put her through this? Gerald struggled to find words. He told her about the voice, about the pull, about feeling needed in a way he hadn't felt in years. Caroline shook her head. She said he was needed at home, with her, with his grandchildren. Gerald said he knew that now. But at the time, It felt like something bigger than himself was calling, something he couldn't ignore. Caroline asked if he was mentally ill, if he needed help. Gerald said he didn't know. Maybe. He admitted that his behavior wasn't normal, that he had made choices that hurt people he loved. But he also couldn't shake the feeling that the work he was doing mattered. Maria watched the reunion from the stairs. She felt like an intruder in this private moment. But she also needed to assess Gerald's mental state. After several minutes, Maria approached them. She explained that Gerald would need to come to the hospital for a full medical and psychological evaluation. She said it was standard procedure in cases like this. Caroline agreed immediately. Gerald nodded slowly. He looked around the basement one more time. He asked if someone would take care of the toys, if someone would finish the work. Caroline promised she would make sure the toys were handled properly. She said they would donate them to children who needed them. Gerald seemed satisfied with that answer. He stood from his chair. Maria and Caroline helped him up the stairs. As they emerged from the basement into the light, Gerald squinted. He had spent so much time in the darkness that the daylight hurt his eyes. They walked him outside to Maria's car. Neighbors had gathered on the sidewalk, curious about the police presence. Gerald kept his head down. He looked exhausted suddenly, as if the weight of the past 2 years had caught up to him. At the hospital, doctors examined Gerald thoroughly. They found him to be malnourished and dehydrated, but otherwise physically healthy. His heart was strong. His lungs were clear. He showed no signs of neurological damage. The psychiatric evaluation was more complex. Gerald spoke openly with the doctors. He described the voice he heard, the compulsion to fix toys, the sense of purpose he felt in the basement. The psychiatrist diagnosed him with a dissociative episode, possibly triggered by stress or an underlying condition that had gone undetected for years. But Gerald didn't fit the typical profile. He was lucid. He understood that his behavior was unusual. He showed genuine remorse for the pain he had caused. The psychiatrist recommended therapy and medication, but didn't believe Gerald was a danger to himself or others. After 3 days in the hospital, Gerald was released into Caroline's care. She took him to her home. She set up a room for him and promised to help him readjust to normal life. Gerald agreed to attend therapy sessions twice a week. He took the prescribed medication. He tried to reconnect with the world he had left behind, but something had changed in him. He was quieter now, more distant. He spent hours staring out the window, watching the trees sway in the wind. Caroline asked him what he was thinking about. He said he was thinking about the toys, about whether anyone had finished repairing them, about whether they had found their way to children who needed them. Caroline contacted local charities and arranged for the toys from Evelyn's basement to be picked up and distributed. She showed Gerald photos of the toys being loaded into trucks. She told him they would go to homeless shelters, foster care programs, and community centers. Gerald smiled when he heard this. It was the first real smile Caroline had seen since bringing him home. Over the following weeks, Gerald slowly began to integrate back into his family. He met with his grandchildren. He attended Sunday dinners. He helped Caroline in her garden. He seemed like himself again, the man everyone remembered. But there were moments when Caroline would catch him staring off into space, his eyes focused on something she couldn't see. She would ask if he was okay. He would nod and say he was fine. But Caroline knew better. A part of her father was still in that basement, still hearing that voice, still feeling that pull. Maria stayed in contact with the family. She visited Gerald once a month to check on his progress. She brought him coffee and they would sit on Caroline's back porch and talk. Gerald thanked Maria for finding him. He said he wasn't sure if he would have ever left on his own. Maria asked if he regretted the 2 years he spent in the basement. Gerald thought about this for a long time. He said he regretted the pain he caused. He regretted leaving without explanation. But he didn't regret the work itself. He said those toys meant something. They represented second chances. And isn't that what life is about? Getting another chance to be something better. Maria didn't disagree. The case officially closed in July of 2017. Maria filed her final report, detailing the circumstances of Gerald's disappearance and recovery. She noted the unusual nature of the case and recommended that similar incidents be evaluated for possible psychological factors. The media picked up the story again when news broke that Gerald had been found. Headlines read, "Retrieve continue missing mall, Santa found alive after 2 years." Reporters camped outside Caroline's house, hoping for an interview. Caroline refused all requests. She wanted to protect her father's privacy and give him space to heal. Gerald never spoke to the press. He had nothing to say that would make sense to strangers. How could he explain something he barely understood himself? The story faded from the news cycle within a week, replaced by other mysteries and tragedies. But in Cedar Rapids, people remembered. The mall where Gerald had worked decided not to hire another Santa that year. It felt wrong somehow. They put up a sign explaining that Santa was taking a year off to rest after his long journey. Children accepted this explanation without question. Adults understood the deeper meaning. By December of 2017, Gerald had been home for 9 months. His therapist said he was making progress. The medication had stabilized his moods. He no longer talked about hearing voices or feeling compelled to do anything beyond his control. But as Christmas approached, Caroline noticed changes in her father's behavior. He became restless. He paced the house at night. He started visiting thrift stores and garage sales, buying broken toys. He brought them home and set up a small workshop in Caroline's garage. He told her he just wanted something to keep his hands busy. Caroline watched him work one afternoon. He sat at a folding table, carefully gluing the arm back onto a plastic doll. His movements were precise and gentle. His expression was peaceful. Caroline realized that her father wasn't sick. He had found something that gave his life meaning, even if that something didn't make sense to anyone else. She decided not to interfere. If fixing toys made him happy, she would support that. Gerald's workshop in the garage became his sanctuary. He spent hours there each day, repairing dolls, bikes, games, and stuffed animals. He worked in silence, focused and content. When he finished each toy, he would place it in a box labeled "Ready." Caroline asked what he planned to do with the finished toys. Gerald said he would donate them to children who needed them. True to his word, every few weeks Gerald and Caroline would load the boxes into her car and deliver them to local charities. The staff at these organizations came to recognize Gerald. They thanked him for his generosity. They showed him photos of children playing with the toys he had fixed. Gerald would smile and nod, but he never stayed long. He always had more work waiting at home. Maria heard about Gerald's workshop through Caroline. She visited one Saturday afternoon and found him in the garage, working on a wooden train set. She asked if he was happy. Gerald looked up from his work and considered the question. He said he was at peace. He explained that he had spent his whole life trying to be what other people needed him to be. A good husband, a good father, a good postal worker, a good Santa Claus. but he never knew what he needed to be for himself. Until the basement. Until the toys. Now he understood that his purpose wasn't about making everyone happy. It was about doing work that felt meaningful to him, even if others didn't understand it. Maria asked if he still heard the voice. Gerald said no. The voice was gone, but the feeling remained. The sense that broken things deserved to be fixed, that forgotten things deserved to be remembered, that every child deserved to feel the magic of receiving a gift made with care. Maria told Gerald she was proud of him. She said it took courage to live authentically, especially when your authentic self confused everyone around you. Gerald thanked her. He said she had saved his life by finding him. Christmas Eve 2017 arrived. 2 years to the day since Gerald had vanished. Caroline invited extended family to her house for dinner. Gerald helped cook, setting the table and making sure everything was perfect. As the evening progressed, the grandchildren asked Gerald to tell them a story. They gathered around him in the living room, their faces bright with anticipation. Gerald settled into an armchair and thought for a moment. Then he began to speak. He told them about a Santa Claus who got lost one Christmas. Not lost in the snow or in the woods, but lost inside himself. This Santa had forgotten what his real job was. He thought his job was to sit in a mall and listen to wishes. But one day he heard a voice that reminded him of something important. His job wasn't just to listen to what children wanted. His job was to fix things that were broken, to heal things that were hurt, to give second chances to things that had been forgotten. The grandchildren listened with wide eyes. They asked if the Santa ever found his way home. Gerald said yes, he did. But he brought something back with him. He brought the knowledge that magic isn't about flying reindeer or climbing down chimneys. Magic is about transformation, about taking something that seems worthless and showing the world it still has value. The grandchildren seemed satisfied with this answer. They hugged Gerald goodnight and ran off to bed, excited for Christmas morning. Caroline sat down next to her father. She asked if that story was about him. Gerald smiled. He said all the best stories are about the person telling them. After everyone had gone to sleep, Gerald walked out to the garage. He sat at his workbench and looked at the toys waiting to be repaired. He picked up a stuffed rabbit with a missing eye. He threaded a needle and began to sew. Outside, snow started to fall. Large, soft flakes that covered the ground in white. Through the garage window, Gerald could see them dancing in the streetlight. He thought about the past 2 years. The basement, the isolation, the strange pull that had led him away from everything he knew. He still couldn't fully explain what happened. The psychiatrists said it was a mental break. His therapist said it was a response to unresolved grief. His daughter said it was a mystery they might never solve. But Gerald had his own theory. He believed that sometimes, when the world gets too loud and too complicated, people need to disappear for a while, not to run away, but to find something they've lost. For him, it was purpose. It was the simple joy of making something better with his own 2 hands. He finished sewing the eye onto the rabbit. He held it up to examine his work. The stitches were even and secure. The rabbit looked whole again. Gerald placed it in the ready box with the others. Tomorrow, these toys would go to children who would love them, and those children would never know the strange journey these toys had taken to reach them. Maria Brodie thought about Gerald often in the months and years that followed. His case remained the strangest she had ever worked, not because of violence or crime, but because it had no clear explanation. Gerald hadn't been kidnapped. He hadn't run away from debt or danger. He had simply followed an impulse that made no rational sense. And that impulse had kept him in a basement for 2 years. What troubled Maria most was how easily it could have ended differently. If Evelyn's neighbors hadn't called for a welfare check, if Patricia hadn't opened that basement door, if Gerald had been in a different mental state, the outcome could have been tragic. But instead, it was simply strange. A man who disappeared became a man who was found. A man who seemed lost was actually exactly where he needed to be. Maria shared the case with other detectives as a teaching tool. She used it to illustrate the importance of keeping an open mind. Not every missing person is a victim. Not every disappearance is a crime. Sometimes people leave because they're searching for something the rest of us can't see. The case also changed how Maria approached her work. She became less focused on solving puzzles and more interested in understanding people. She learned to listen more carefully to the stories families told about their missing loved ones. She learned to recognize when someone's disappearance might be voluntary, driven by forces that had nothing to do with external threats. Years later, when Maria retired from the police department, she kept one file with her, Gerald Thompson's case. She kept it as a reminder that the world is stranger and more complex than any investigation can fully capture. As for Evelyn Mitchell, she recovered from her malnutrition and moved into an assisted living facility. She lived another 3 years, passing away peacefully in her sleep in the spring of 2020. When Caroline heard the news, she visited Evelyn's grave and left flowers. She thanked the elderly woman for keeping her father safe. Gerald continued his work in the garage. He never returned to playing Santa at the mall. He had no desire to sit in that velvet chair again, listening to wishes he couldn't grant. His focus now was on the tangible, the physical act of repair, the satisfaction of seeing something broken become whole. Local organizations came to depend on Gerald's donations. They scheduled regular pickups, knowing he would have boxes ready. Children across Cedar Rapids played with toys that Gerald had restored, never knowing the hands that had fixed them or the strange story behind their second chance at life. Gerald never regretted his 2 years in the basement. When people asked about that time, he said it was necessary. He said, sometimes you have to step out of your life completely to understand what your life is supposed to be about. He said the basement taught him that every broken thing has value. Every forgotten thing deserves attention. Every ending can become a new beginning if someone cares enough to make it happen. Caroline eventually understood this too. She stopped trying to make sense of what happened and simply accepted it. Her father was different now, but he was also more himself than he had ever been. He had found peace in an unexpected place. He had discovered purpose in an unconventional way. And ultimately, wasn't that what everyone was searching for? The story of Gerald Thompson's disappearance and recovery became something of a local legend. People told it at dinner parties and family gatherings. Some versions emphasized the mystery. Others focused on the mental health aspects. But the version that Gerald himself preferred was simpler. He told people that he had taken a long detour but found his way home. He said the detour taught him that home isn't always a place. Sometimes it's a feeling. Sometimes it's work that makes you forget about time. Sometimes it's knowing that your hands can heal what the world has broken. In the end, Gerald lived the rest of his life quietly. He continued fixing toys until his hands grew too stiff with arthritis. Even then, he would sit in his garage and sort pieces, organizing parts so that others could continue the work. He taught his grandchildren how to repair simple toys. He showed them how to sew torn fabric, how to glue broken plastic, how to paint over scratches. He passed on not just a skill, but a philosophy, that nothing is truly broken beyond repair, that patience and care can restore almost anything, that the act of fixing something is an act of love. When Gerald passed away in 2024, at the age of 72, his funeral was attended by hundreds of people, former mall customers who remembered his kindness as Santa, charity workers who had received his donations, family members who had slowly come to understand his journey. Maria Brody attended as well. She sat in the back of the church and listened to the eulogies. Speaker after speaker talked about Gerald's generosity, his gentle spirit, his dedication to making children smile, but no one mentioned the basement. No one talked about the 2 years he spent in darkness fixing toys that no one else cared about. That part of Gerald's story remained known only to a few. Maria thought about this as she left the funeral. She thought about how people only remember the parts of your story that make sense to them, the parts that fit into neat categories. But the messy parts, the strange parts, the parts that don't have easy explanations, those are the parts that define who you really are. Gerald Thompson vanished on Christmas Eve and was found 2 years later in a basement, smiling in the dark. That smile, Maria realized, was the key to understanding everything. He wasn't smiling because he was confused or delusional. He was smiling because he had found something most people spend their entire lives searching for. A reason to wake up every morning, a task that felt important, a way to leave the world slightly better than he found it. And maybe that's what the voice was, the one that called him down that hallway all those years ago. Maybe it wasn't madness or illness. Maybe it was simply the sound of his own soul, finally loud enough to be heard above the noise of everyday life, telling him exactly where he needed to be. Gerald Thompson's Christmas Eve disappearance remains one of the most mysterious missing person cases in holiday history. While most Santa Claus stories end at the North Pole, this one ended in a basement workshop, where Christmas magic took on a different meaning. His vanishing act reminds us that sometimes people aren't truly lost, they're simply finding themselves in unexpected places. Whether you believe in Christmas miracles or unexplained mysteries, Gerald's story proves that the holiday season holds secrets we may never fully understand. What would you do if someone you loved disappeared without a trace? Let us know in the comments below.